For more than 30 years, Brad Pitt's love life has played out in public, on magazine covers, in courtrooms, and in the kind of headlines most people never have to live through. Four women have defined the story: Juliette Lewis, Gwyneth Paltrow, Jennifer Aniston, and Angelina Jolie. But only one of them ever heard him say, on a stage, in front of the world, that she was the love of my life. Decades later, those same two people would sit down together, older and softer, and say something even more telling. This is the real story of how Brad Pitt got there, told through his own words and hers. Before he was Brad Pitt, he was William Bradley Pitt, born December 18, 1963, and raised in a conservative Christian household, first in Shawnee, Oklahoma, and then in Springfield, Missouri. His father ran a trucking company. His mother worked as a school counselor. It was an ordinary, unglamorous childhood, nothing that hinted at the life that was coming. He enrolled at the University of Missouri to study journalism and advertising. But with only a couple of credits left before graduation, he made the decision that reportedly stunned his family. He dropped out and drove to Los Angeles in 1986 to try acting instead. The years that followed were unglamorous in a different way. Before any of the fame, he took on the kind of jobs actors take while waiting for a break: driving cars, moving furniture, working in costume for promotional gigs, while spending his nights in acting classes, slowly building a craft he wasn't sure would ever pay off. His earliest credits were forgettable. Bit parts on television shows, a handful of lines here and there, nothing that suggested what was coming. Then, in 1991, a brief but unforgettable turn as a charming drifter named J.D. in Thelma and Louise changed everything almost overnight. Suddenly, he wasn't an unknown actor auditioning for scraps. He was one of the most talked-about new faces in Hollywood. Fame arrived fast. Figuring out love, as the next 3 decades would show, took a great deal longer, and it's a story best understood one relationship at a time. Brad met Juliette Lewis in 1989 on the set of the TV movie Too Young to Die. He was 27. She was 17. What began as a working relationship turned into a serious, live-in romance that lasted roughly 3 years, carrying them through his breakout in Thelma and Louise and their 1993 film together, California. By her own account, Lewis had already admired his work before they ever started dating, telling the Los Angeles Times around that time that she respected being with someone in the same field. During the peak of their relationship, she described the easy rhythm of being together constantly and even collaborating on projects, saying they never grew tired of each other's company. That closeness showed up on screen too. In 1993, the pair reunited professionally for the film California, and their real-life chemistry was widely noted in coverage of the film at the time. The relationship didn't survive 1993, though. Pitt's career was accelerating rapidly, while Lewis was navigating her own well-documented struggles with substance use and the sudden intensity of public attention. But the split wasn't bitter, and neither of them has ever tried to minimize what the relationship meant. Years later, in a Vanity Fair interview, Pitt looked back on it with real warmth, saying he still loved her, praising her intelligence, and calling it one of the greatest relationships of his life, while acknowledging that the fantasy that love alone is enough to sustain a relationship simply isn't true. Lewis, for her part, has described him with equal generosity. Speaking to The Guardian in 2006, she said she genuinely loved him and called him a very stand-up, good guy, while noting it had been her longest relationship up to that point. In 2009, she pointed out, with some irony, that people only ever ask about her relationship with Pitt because of his fame, even though her actual marriage was, in her words, the far more significant relationship of her life. Neither of them has ever tried to erase what those years meant. But it was young love, formed before either of them understood what fame would eventually cost them, the kind of relationship that shapes a person without necessarily being built to last. Brad met Gwyneth Paltrow in 1994 on the set of David Fincher's Say Seven. He was already a rising star. She was becoming Hollywood royalty in her own right, the daughter of director Bruce Paltrow and actress Blythe Danner. Their chemistry was immediate and, by most accounts, obvious to everyone around them. In January 1996, accepting the Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor for 12 Monkeys, Brad thanked Gwyneth from the stage, calling her his angel, and, in the words that would follow him for the rest of his career, the love of his life. It wasn't a throwaway line. That December, he proposed to her during a trip to Argentina. By all accounts, her father, TV director Bruce Paltrow, adored him. Gwyneth has since said her father was devastated when the engagement ended, in part because he had genuinely believed Pitt would become his son-in-law. But the engagement didn't survive the following year. Gwyneth has since said she simply wasn't ready, that she was 24, overwhelmed by her own rising career, and not prepared for a commitment that size. Looking back on that period, she's admitted she hadn't yet figured out who she was, and that she spent much of her 20s trying to please everyone around her rather than trusting her own instincts. They called it off in the summer of 1997, and Hollywood's golden couple quietly came apart. What makes this story different from his other relationships isn't the breakup, it's what came after. Gwyneth and Brad stayed in touch, on and off, over the following decades. In 2018, Paltrow told Howard Stern that after her father's death in 2002, Pitt had confronted producer Harvey Weinstein on her behalf, following an unwanted advance she experienced as a young actress. In 2020, she told Harper's Bazaar she remained friendly with him and held no bad blood. Then, in June 2022, the two of them sat down together for an interview on Paltrow's website, Goop, ostensibly to talk about a skincare collaboration. The conversation turned personal. Paltrow brought up her late father, and the two of them reminisced about the engagement, the proposal, and what might have been. She joked to Pitt, "I finally found the Brad I was supposed to marry. It just took me 20 years, referring to her husband, Brad Falchuk. Pitt's reply was simple, and for a man who rarely discusses his private life publicly, unusually direct. "It's lovely to have you as a friend now, and I do love you." Paltrow told him she loved him too. It's the closest thing to a real adult echo of that 1996 Golden Globes declaration. Not a rekindled romance, but a rare on-the-record acknowledgement, 26 years later, that the feeling never fully disappeared. In a 2023 appearance on the Call Her Daddy podcast, Paltrow went a step further, describing her chemistry with Pitt as belonging to a different category than any of her other relationships. The kind of connection people mean when they talk about the love of your life. Of everyone Brad Pitt has publicly loved, Gwyneth Paltrow is the only one he named that way out loud on a stage, and the only one he returned to decades later to say it again in his own words on the record, with her sitting right beside him. Brad met Jennifer Aniston in 1998. He was one of the biggest movie stars in the world. She was the most recognizable sitcom actress on television, starring in Friends. They married on July 29, 2000, in a lavish Malibu wedding, and for a few years they were, by every external measure, Hollywood's most stable power couple. They even built the production company Plan B Entertainment together. But their goals didn't align on timing. Aniston was deep into Friends and building a film career. Pitt was chasing artistically demanding roles in films like Troy and, later, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Questions about starting a family put pressure on the marriage from both sides. They announced their separation in January 2005, insisting there was no one to blame. Though rumors about Pitt's chemistry with his Mr. and Mrs. Smith co-star, Angelina Jolie, were already swirling and would soon be confirmed. Both of them have since reflected honestly on why it ended. Aniston told Vanity Fair that Pitt could be, in her words, missing a sensitivity chip, while stressing that she never believed he was mean-spirited or acted to deliberately hurt her. Pitt, for his part, told Parade that he'd spent much of the 1990s trying to hide out, and admitted that part of what went wrong in the marriage was his own tendency to pretend it was something it wasn't rather than confronting what he actually wanted from his life and career at the time. What's notable is what happened afterward. Aniston and Pitt didn't stay bitter. They first reunited publicly at her 50th birthday party in February 2019, then again backstage at the 2020 SAG Awards, a moment captured on camera that instantly went viral. Aniston later told Howard Stern's radio show that reconnecting felt completely natural, describing Pitt as a buddy and insisting there was no oddness at all between them, aside from everyone else's fascination with the reunion. Later that year, The two even joined a virtual table read of Fast Times at Ridgemont High together for charity. It's a relationship that cooled from romance into a real, lasting friendship. Not the great unresolved love of his life, but arguably one of the more emotionally mature outcomes in his entire romantic history. Brad and Angelina Jolie met while filming Mr. and Mrs. Smith in 2003, while Pitt was still married to Aniston. Their on-set chemistry became public knowledge quickly, and by 2005, the same month Brad and Jennifer announced their split, the tabloid world had already dubbed them Brangelina. Their family grew fast. Jolie adopted Maddox and Zahara before the relationship with Pitt became public, and the couple went on to have 4 more children together, Shiloh, Pax, and twins Knox and Vivian. For years, they were held up as Hollywood's most admired couple, known as much for their humanitarian work as their fame. They married in 2014 at Chateau Miraval, the French estate they'd bought together in 2008 and turned into a genuinely successful winery. For a long stretch, the couple were as well known for their humanitarian work and sprawling, multiracial family as for their films, routinely described in the press as Hollywood's most powerful and most admired pairing. But behind that image, both of them have since acknowledged real strain. Pitt has spoken publicly about his struggles with alcohol during that period, later revealing he joined Alcoholics Anonymous and removed what he called his own drinking privileges following the split. Jolie has spoken more generally about the exhaustion of raising 6 children under constant media scrutiny while managing her own health. 2 years after the wedding, in September 2016, it fell apart. Jolie filed for divorce, citing the health of the family, following a private plane incident involving Pitt and the children that both sides have described very differently ever since. Investigations by the FBI and Child Protective Services followed. No charges were ultimately filed against him. What came after was one of the longest, most contentious divorce and custody battles in modern Hollywood history. A stretch of nearly 8 years marked by shifting custody arrangements, the disqualification of a private judge originally assigned to the case, and repeated legal filings from both sides. Their divorce wasn't legally finalized until December 2024. By then, 4 of their 6 children were legally adults, and the 2 youngest, Knox and Vivian, were 16. Even that wasn't the end. The fight over Chateau Miraval, the French estate the couple bought together in 2008, married at in 2014, and built into a winery now estimated to be worth roughly $164 million, has continued as an entirely separate legal battle. Jolie sold her half of the property to the Stoli Group in 2021. Pitt has spent years in court arguing that the sale violated a prior agreement, that neither of them would sell their stake without the other's consent, and that he was denied the chance to buy her out himself. As of mid-2026, the case is still working through.